Okay, guys, thanks for joining me today for the podcast at the Atlanta Ignite. Um, just a short introduction. I think we're going to start with you, and we're going to end with me.
All
Stefan.
right. I'm Stefan Denninger. I'm based in Austria and I work for ACP as a service integrator and also a data center provider, a service provider. And the topic today is Azure Stack.
Yes.
And we're running Azure Pack. So this is the version before Azure Stack. And I think we have time to talk about that. And yeah, it's a great experience. We'll see what to discuss now.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Benjamin?
my name is Ben Hupperdin. I'm a senior consultant and cloud architect as well for a German company, for VAS, Value Added Services GmbH. And we're working already productively with Azure Pack, like he said, with some of our customers. We're like, there's no one live yet, so we're evaluating Azure Stack, having been doing some testing with TP1, now going into TP2.
Okay.
Getting
thanks.
interesting there.
Thank you. So finally, it's me, Markus Klein. I'm an MVP on Cloud and Data Center Management in the 4th year in a row now, and I've been working with System Center in the past. Later on, the last years, my main task was Azure Pack. So we have all the same experiences. I worked for a German service provider that was completely running on Azure Pack as an architect, and after 3 years back, I'm now in consultancy again, working for a huge German company running Azure Stack, extending Pack and extending Azure Pack, and preparing the steps for Azure Stack. So I'm already testing TP1, TP2 of Azure Stack. Yeah, and good question for most of us, or for the attendees, I think, is what is Azure Stack really? Because at first everybody really got the idea that Azure Stack is the next version of Azure Pack, so everybody was talking about how to migrate, should we stop integrating or starting with Azure Pack right now? What do you think about it? What's your experience with that?
What we know now is that it is not a new version of Azure Pack. So
yes, that's right.
It is similar to the classic portal, to the Azure portal we have now. And it's this very similar journey on premises. So there's two stamps side by side,
yeah.
And there will be a connector we're discussing soon, but there's no upgrade, and what I know now is no migration path. So
yeah, that's right.
This is the low light.
Yeah.
The good thing is that Azure Pack is now extended in support, so we can run the Azure Pack story like you much longer till 26. But yeah, Azure Stack is more bringing down the new portal down to the local data centers.
That's right, and I've talked to a lot of Microsoft guys with that, and they told me that's quite easy. Azure Stack is the hybrid cloud solution. Azure Pack is the private cloud solution because it's based on private cloud services like System Center, and then we have Azure, so that's quite easy. So, and there's no migration, no direct migration from one to each other because it's different technology.
Yeah, and I think that's an important thing because Azure Stack is in the basis just Windows Server 2016, not like Azure Pack before, where you had to use half of the System Center stack to get Azure Pack up and running, supported. So the cool things, or the cool basis in Azure Stack is all coming out of Windows Server, and then there's a lot of magic happening in the portal itself and the APIs, which goes on top of that. But we have all the software defined below.
That's right, and then we have the experiences of Azure.
Yeah.
That's on top of it. So, and then in the middle we have the magic Azure Resource Manager, ARM. Good question. If a customer today is thinking about to start with a service provider offering, would you tell him, let's start with Azure Pack? Or would you tell him, wait another half a year or a little bit more and start with Azure Stack?
For now, or
For now, yes.
Yeah, for now, the only release we have is Azure Pack, and Azure Pack is full supported with Windows 2016, and also with the new stuff like Storage Spaces Direct and the software-defined network stack and the network controller. So you can use a lot of features from the 2016 wave now, also like the load balancers and the shielded VMs, all this new stuff. For now, it's the only version we have. So because TP2 is not for production, of course, is a technical preview. There will come new waves later this year or next year, and the release is announced for mid of next year. So today, it's just one answer.
That's right.
What's your meaning?
In my opinion, the question, the answer to this could be, it depends.
Yeah, it always depends.
It always depends.
Yeah,
yes.
It depends on what the customer needs, what his schedule is. If it's very tight and he needs it yesterday, then there is only one option, and we can't wait for support for Azure Stack. If he's in the pre-phase of the project or in the early phases of the project and he's still evaluating where he's going in the future, then I wouldn't start evaluating on Azure Pack anymore. I think that time is gone. But I would start using the time talking to the hardware vendors as well, because there's only a very select club of hardware partners to support Azure Stack in the near future. So I would start working with them. I would start working with consultants like us, and I would start going into depth already now if the time frame is allowing for a go live end of next year or second half of next year.
Yeah, that's a good question. Mainly if you go to a service provider and ask them, do you already have predefined your services? What's your offering? From my experiences in the past, a lot of them got the idea, oh, we need some service offering, we're going to be a service provider. And if you ask them what's your offering, they tell you a lot. Everything Microsoft's currently offering, so that's another step. If customers at that stage, then we should start first discussing with him on services, what the services he's offering or he will be offering, and maybe that could fit in the timeline to start over with Azure Stack, because today we have just the announcement of TP2, so you can start testing. You can start testing on some hardware, whatever, if the requirements are there, the hardware requirements. But you're right, for the final release, for GA, the good question is he going with HP, with Lenovo, or is he going to be on Dell? Or whatever, because at the customer I'm today, he's working with Fujitsu hardware. So good question for the future of this. And as far as today's announcements has been, there will be no software-only version in the first versions of Azure Stack. Nobody really knows about the future.
Yeah. So there is currently there is only the option for early go live to go with one of the three partners. Or maybe there will be a fourth in the future, but in the beginning it will be a dedicated hardware partner and not build your own Azure Stack. I personally do understand that bit, because it's Azure Stack is not just like a Lego box for 5 years old. You just do a lot more than just sticking together a handful of pieces.
Was it that with Azure Pack?
Never, no.
I got the experiences with my service provider. He was an OEM, or he is an OEM, and he put his own parts together, and then you run into issues with networking, with storage, etc. So that's not easy, and it's not. In meantimes, the good question is does the customer really understand why he's doing that? Because if you talk to them and give them the feedback, you have to buy hardware as an integrated system with Azure Stack. He's always, the first answer is, I don't want that. Yeah. But if you talk a little bit deeper with them, then you get the idea and he understands why this is essential to have a supported version of hardware up and running at the best of breed, and not something where you're ever struggling with the support, etc. So
I compared a little bit to storage systems. When you need storage, you don't buy one drive, you also buy a complete system. And you don't take care about firmware and RAID adapter firmware, and all this is abstracted in the system, and you get out one cable. And I think now we get this one step ahead. You buy the whole system, and you get out cloud.
And first, some years ago, the first impression from the feedback of Microsoft for Azure Pack was buy something, parts, put it together. As soon as it's on the HCLs, on the hardware compatibility list, everything's fine. And this wasn't a real solution. And as Microsoft recognized this with the CPS offering, so a hardware bundle to Azure Stack, Pack. So they now get the other way around. They start with a hardware solution, and maybe later on will offer a software release or whatever. So, but does this mean that the customer today, if he starts testing, has to buy hardware?
No, the testing journey now is to develop on Azure, because the APIs, the portal is everything the same, is really the same, if all the services you use are later available on Azure Stack.
You can start testing today in Azure, but is this some kind of POC to tell a customer, we do a POC with Azure,
No.
and later on we go with a hardware solution?
No, if you talk to a POCs, you can do a one node deployment with the TP2, and this is possible to deploy on any hardware. There's a list you have to do. And the good story is from TP1 to TP2 is now it's not a disconnect environment like it was TP1. So you can connect it to public internet. You can also test connectivity, VPN, routing, all this stuff around. And you can really test with this, Microsoft calls it the one node system.
Yeah.
And we heard it on the pre-day on Sunday that it will always be available also after the GA. And the releases are getting in 1 month. Waves. So this is a good testing platform. Yeah.
So we are on the same level with the testing POC version and the hardware version. So if you go to a customer with the on a POC or for a POC, you can start with that and later on switch over to a hardware solution. So he can test if everything's fitting. But your feedback or your answer with Azure wasn't that bad, because today everybody's asking on Azure Resource Manager, what's that? What the hell I'm doing as an IT pro? I'm working with Visual Studio or whatever. How are we going to start with that? And this IRM, the Azure Resource Manager, is available in Azure too. So it's the same code shared release, and you can start trying today. I think would be a good task to start with that.
I think learning ARM, learning how to handle JSON templates for ARM is one of the most essential tasks, because you can use it in all of Microsoft's current up-to-date cloud solutions. And since both of us are from Germany, there's a new cloud offering based out of Germany, which is disconnected from the normal public Azure offering, but you still have the same connectors. You still work with the same API, so a template you define today, you write today, you can use to deploy services in the public Azure cloud, in the German Azure cloud, or in the future in Azure Stack, or right now in TP2.
Yeah.
And that is the most brilliant part. So it's not a wasted investment if you start learning on whatever of these three bases. The APIs, if you go through JSON or one of the other API variants, is, I think, up to the user. A developer will more likely go into C# and play around with it, go directly to the API, and a consultant like me who's freaking off if he sees C#, I run away. But JSON is great, because even I can understand that and work with it. And the IT Pro is able to easily adjust to that. It is very simple, very open how it's working, so we can just, with a very, very low learning curve. We can get them where they want.
Yeah, that's
get
right.
to
And
be.
especially if a customer is today, wanting an SQL Server, Exchange or whatever, the good question is always, where's the RRM template for this? And as we've seen today in a session, there's the possibility to export the RRM template, modify it a little bit because the endpoints are different. But after that, you can just start over and use it on the same technology, the cloud-inspired infrastructure, and run the RRM template like Mark and Jeffrey have shown today in the afternoon keynote.
Yeah.
So that's quite easy now.
Yeah,
Although, yes, for the IT Pro, you have to make the IT Pro more a DevOps.
Yeah, a bit.
A bit, yes.
But it's not like he's changing from one magnetic pole to the other. So he needs to adjust a little bit. He's still doing his ops stuff. It gets more and more dev into that, but I think that is the future.
It's less clicking.
Yeah, it's
and more doing some scripting or whatever. Because in the past, a lot of the guys wanted that click and easy administration of the Microsoft solution, but with PowerShell, I think this is nearly the past.
And there's a nice quote from Jeffrey Snower, who said at a conference, at one of the last conferences, either learn PowerShell or learn how to say the words, do you want fries with that? So I think that says everything. You still can do a lot of clicking in your current server releases, but a few years ago, 100% of the configuration were going through GUI, through clicky stuff, and nowadays and maybe 20 to 80% were PowerShell based or CLI based, and nowadays it's 100% PowerShell, looking at Exchange, looking at Windows Server, and not even on. If you're lucky, you have 90% you can click through.
Yeah, that's
so
the other thing.
And it's the same for Azure. So you can connect to every Azure service through PowerShell. Yeah. You can work with everything in Azure just from the same environment which you use to manage all of your other Microsoft stuff, and not even Microsoft. One of the biggest suppliers for PowerShell is, or for cool PowerShell module is VMware.
Yes.
So it's brilliant. It's adopted by the industry. It's just a standard. Right. So learn that, and on top of that, JSON to.
And then you're fine for the next 5 to 10 years
definitely.
From technology, I think.
Definitely.
So.
Well, I'm not so afraid about the Visual Studio because I was coding years ago.
Okay.
And is also a really nice deployment option to have with the VS Community Edition or the Visual Studio Code.
Yeah.
And you have really great IntelliSense, much more than with all the other editors. And you can deploy it directly from there. Yeah? And you can just switch the deployment from Azure to Azure Stack. Yeah. And we have a customer in Salzburg, and he's developing for in the future for a local installation on premises because of regulation in the government. But he's now developing on Azure, and he knows that it is the same. I think it's a web app with multiple tiers. Yeah. And after they bring it down to on-premise, and then it's going live.
It's more that story of the really universal application layer. Yeah. So we got a framework. This framework you can put it on Azure, on some local stuff. It works in general as soon as the service is there. Yeah. And then you're fine with that. But for a customer that's today starting with Azure Pack or already running it, having its experiences, the good question for him is now, how do I provide this to my customers? Because when we are on a single portal idea, the good question could be for him, we have the old portal, we have the new portal. So do we have to have 2 portals for our customers if services are on the old version or in the new version? So we have that thing called connector. You talked about that some minutes ago. So do you have more information on this?
My wish was you can remove the whole old portal. For now, it's a wish. But what we are getting very soon is that we get you can switch on the new one. Yeah. On the new portal with the same identity. So you have one identity, you connect to both
As soon as
environments.
your Azure Pack environment is based on ADFS or Azure Stack, Azure AD.
ADFS, and then connected to some ideas in the cloud. And as long as you have that, you can really switch over on the left side with a drop-down list from Stack to Pack, and then the resource providers on the left side are changing to virtual machine networks. This is now focused on, and so you see it in one portal, but you really realize that you switch the environment.
Yeah.
So this is the situation for now. What we saw, we can. There are videos online where you can see that, and so the new portal is your home base.
Yeah, and you have your one portal for the customer, and that's the interesting thing.
Exactly.
Second step and second wish is then how do we get from Azure Pack VMs or services to Azure Stack? And as of now, there's no information if this will be somewhere available. Maybe it could be a third-party solution or whatever. What do you think? Does a customer migrate its end customers to Azure Stack if he's on Azure Pack today? You're on Azure Pack. My customer is on Azure Pack too, or my customers. So it's always a question they will ask us as a consultant, I think.
Of course, yeah. There are some fields where you have to discuss with speak to the customer because of the VM sizes. In Azure Pack it's possible, and we use it to have custom sizes, so whatever the customer wants, he gets. Of course, there's also a pre-configured list of sizes, and there's you can switch over. But in the new portal, it is a fixed size. In the A and the D machines, I think the G is also coming, but it depends on the hardware you have. But this will be one big question. And I think the rest of the services are fine, because site-to-site VPN is inside routing, all the rest of the stuff. And I think the PowerShell scripts from the classic portal to the new one could be very similar to the migration path of web to Azure Stack.
As soon as you are relying on Azure Pack already on DSC, PowerShell DSC, then this is great. And especially for my customer, I always tell them VM roles is a good solution for Azure Pack. But your real solution is use DSC. Make sure you get one template for each operating system, and then fire up one PowerShell script, and the rest has been done with DSC, because otherwise they always tell you we need to upgrade or update or patch or whatever the template. How we do that? If there's PowerShell and DSC, it's quite easy. So if you are relying on Azure Pack deployments today on PowerShell, and that's what I tell always my customers, this is the first step to prepare Azure Stack. Make sure we are on PowerShell and DSC, then it's quite easy, or a little bit more easy.
Yeah, I think that's just the case, as I mentioned before. PowerShell, and DSC is one of the coolest features which were added in the history of PowerShell, and I think in the history of scripting. It is different. So if you're used to normal scripts, or even with automation or SMA or Azure Automation to workflows, getting DSC configuration set up is a bit of a understanding.
It's a mind change.
Yeah, it's a mind change. You need to find your way through that. But it's not impossible. It's not something completely new. It's still, the basis is the same. If you you can still work with variables, with embed everything in a script, and that is just
that's it.
Brilliant.
So that is the way. And the good question for me is always, if a customer is today on Azure Pack, he's parallelly implementing Azure Stack because he needs to. It's a new hardware. So the first question for the end customer is then, do we need to move him to Azure Stack? At first, as soon there's no migration issue or trouble somewhere, he could still rely on his services he's knowing and he's running in Azure Pack, and then we could think about, a migration when the next update comes or whatever,
The hardware
then
refresh,
create a
yeah.
connection between the networks and then move him to the other side of the street and then step by step migrate everything from Azure Pack to Azure Stack. So within time you are fine with it, I think. That could be another idea.
I think that is absolutely relevant and good way to go. I mean, Azure Stack and CPS are a bit changing the way people look at the virtualization infrastructure. Because from the rest of the hardware, especially looking at storage, like you mentioned before, looking at storage, people always were used to buying a piece of storage and using that for the next 3 to 5 years until it's written off, and then that got ripped out and replaced by new stuff. But you usually you did your firmware upgrades, you did your little polishing and all of that, but you usually didn't replace it in the middle of the track.
Yeah.
So and the same is true for, I think, solutions like a CPS. You don't rip it out just because it's not running Azure Stack or reinstall everything on that. You build the Azure Stack
Another
parallel to that,
yeah.
and then when slowly
you move the payload.
you move it slowly
So
over. And same is true for most of the virtual machines. They have a life cycle as well. When they get replaced because the solution is not needed anymore, build up the new solution on the new platform.
Yeah, that's I think the better thing. And as we all know, in-place upgrades are not a good thing. So why should we rely on that? So that could be a better thing. We know that Azure Stack is relying on Azure, storage spaces, or storage spaces direct, to be clear. So if a customer is telling us, I need SAN support, will that be an option? Will there be anything where we can put the storage somewhere else than STD?
For today?
For today, the first version, not.
No.
If, in my opinion, the only option we could have is there will be a resource provider or whatever that will fit and connect those SAN storage to Azure Stack. It could be the only way.
Yeah, from the design it should be possible because in between is a scale-out file server, and the scale-out file server you can build on storage whatever you want.
Yeah.
The thing is, if the APIs are possible, to that you can select on when you do a new storage account, then you say, oh, please go to my 3-part, to my Dell system, to my V7000, whatever.
Yeah.
I think
we will see this next year.
Yeah,
I think so too.
I think it will not really be the case that you can naturally attach it to the base of Azure Stack. I guess it's more like you're going with current hardware replacements as well. You still have the old storage, there's still something lying around there, and you run the VM from that storage, and then you attach LAN, or you attach iSCSI or file-based access to that. So, but I think it defeats a bit the purpose of Azure Stack to attach external storage to that machine, because it's in the end it is a hyper-converged solution, and if I then, I have the storage inside of that stack already, and if I then go out and buy a new shiny new storage and attach it to that, then I must have a very good reason.
Would be the same story if you buy a car, buy a Porsche and tell me, okay, but I need the machine, the underlying machine should be from Mercedes.
Yeah.
So it's nearly the same. But if a customer really wants it, and perhaps he's out of hardware for testing or whatever, you can do that today too. So with TP1 it was possible to add iSCSI storage. Just start use it with one network card, then interrupt the installation, reconnect storage. It worked. So for testing, this could be done. But I wouldn't do that for a productive environment.
Yeah, that was fun actually. I did that on my first lab because there was a hardware I got. I got a server, which is fine, and now a server always includes at least one CPU and some RAM, but you don't, nowadays you don't necessarily have more than one system disk, sometimes not even that, so I needed to connect to storage to get it up and running. But in the end, it's that's again defeating the purpose. So
it is.
You're cheating.
Yeah.
So
you do that for sure.
We will see this.
We will see
next
this. The
year.
future will tell us.
And user voice is your place to be. Yeah.
That's all, the thing I'm always telling my customers. If it's for Azure Stack or Pack, user voice is that way you have to place it, because with Azure Pack, for example, this is user-driven, user voice-driven development.
And it really worked.
It worked, yes.
Yeah.
Tried it with some of my customers too. So if you talk to customers, and we do that every day, what could be an idea for them, for plan, if they tell you, okay, Azure Stack will be the future, what should I do for development myself, for making myself an Azure Stack expert? What would you tell him?
I would say just start.
Just start, yes. Try and error.
I think one of the best sessions from Mark van Eyck, learning the ARM template from scratch, and it was just in half an hour, and you get a clue of it, how it works, and the rest is practice and learning and doing. And I think from this perspective, you will be really fast, because take an Azure trial account, sit down, and after some hours you get it. I think this is the way, and usually the customer knows exactly what he knows and what he needs. So what components, and after some learning around, he knows how to bring it together, and then it's the same if you deploy it on Azure or Azure Stack.
Right.
It's just a place where it runs then.
That's the whole point about that. Again, learn PowerShell, learn ARM templates, learn JSON, and you're ready to go. And do the learning on Azure, because it doesn't really matter. In the documentation, you will find a note within the API documentation or the template documentation. There's a remark. It's running on Azure. It's running on that template version. It's not yet running on
that
Azure
API
Stack.
Version,
So you're very flexible. And just get started. As Stefan said, just get started and learn the basics, because you can use them in whatever environment, Microsoft-based environment you will be in the future.
That's right, and if you don't have a GitHub account, you should get one, because GitHub is the source for all documentation, for all the templates, etc., etc. So this is another good start. And finally, if you want some more information on this, my community, the Microsoft Cloud community in Germany, is another point to start.
Yes,
we are doing some webcasts in the future, especially for Azure Stack things. So check the website, get the dates, and it's all for free. And if there's somebody, for example, by chance, in Munich on the 12th of October, as we both are, there's a meeting with my community, so I would always like customers, consultants or whatever attending. So check the website, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. We have the same meeting on the 20th of October, 1 week later.
I know, yes.
With the Azure Stack community in Vienna.
Very
and
good.
I think maybe you should think about connecting this both together,
of course,
or whatever.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.